Before I begin, I wanted to say a quick word about Mother's Day. First of all, I wanted to ask if every mom in the room could stand up so we could clap for you. Thank you. Go ahead and stand up. I know who you are. I'll make you do it. Thank you so much. We love you. There are some cute little plants in the foyer that you can take home if you want. We will not be offended if you don't take them, but if you want them, they're there for you. Really, this sermon is dedicated to you all. I'm just going to share a lot of my experience, stories and such. It'll be a little more lighthearted. Before we do that, I have enough announcements today that I split them in half because I didn't want you to feel exhausted at the end. And so that's the kind of guy I am. I split them for you. So I'm going to run through a couple really quick. So first of all, this is our last Sunday together here for the next 6 weeks. Just a reminder, starting next Sunday, we'll be meeting at 1 p.m. The address is right there. It's also on our website with the Detroit Church. It's a great time. The Detroit Church recently moved locations, which some people it's tough for, but for us, pretty close. So don't brag about it when you get there, but you can be pumped about it silently. If you want to play softball, I'm pretty sure the sign-ups are done, so you can just watch. That's all I got for you. So we're going to start something new. Once a month over the summer, I'm going to do a teaching midweek, where I hit on perhaps a more nuanced topic that's harder to teach on, the time constraints on a Sunday, with a different vibe. There's going to be like Q&A and such. So this Wednesday at 7 p.m. here at St. Luke's, we're talking about discipleship and community without judgmentalism. And the word judgmentalism is a triggering word for everybody in different ways. And so we're going to address that. Like, how can we have real community, real discipleship, and contend with our culture in a variety of ways? So it should be a great time, I hope. But it'll at the very least be interesting. So I'd love to have you come with your questions, and there'll be a good back and forth. This young man's name is Brandon Heselton. And he is from Chicago. He's a disciple from Chicago. I'm pretty sure he grew up in the church there, but I'm not 100% sure. He currently goes to college in Vancouver, Canada, and he wanted to come here on his own dime to train for the ministry. So he's going to be here in like a week. And so when you see him, you're like, hey, I saw a picture of you. I presume he won't be wearing those glasses in church. But I just wanted to let you know he's going to be here. He's going to be a part of things, just to give him a really warm welcome, right? He's coming to really devote his time and his heart to the work here. And so I just wanted you to know before he got here that he'll be here. Pretty cool. Lastly, I forgot to fill this slide out. You're going to hear more about this when we go east. But for those of you who are newer to the church, or perhaps you're visiting, or perhaps you just haven't heard me talk about it a lot, because I don't talk about it a lot, every year, the Detroit Church as a whole, which includes the Ann Arbor congregation here, we collect what's called a special missions contribution. Think of the regular contribution that we give goes to the work of our local ministry and the larger Detroit Church in all the ways that does. The special missions is kind of the stuff that we really want to do that we need the extra funds for. It's especially sending money to other churches who have less. We support a lot of other churches worldwide. And so primarily that's what that money is going to. And when we get to Detroit, there'll be a really clear breakdown of exactly where it's all going. I forgot to throw it up here. But really the ask has been, when you talk about money, it's always an odd thing, especially if you struggle for any reason with your own personal funds, or you struggle with the idea of giving to church, which I can understand. But I just think it's important that oftentimes the church will set a goal. Like the goal set by the Detroit Church is, if you could pray about and think about giving 10 times your regular contribution amount. That's been the request. Now keep in mind, it is a request. We are entrusting everybody to just do your best to give generously. I know that sounds like such a minister thing to say. I don't care about the amount, just give with your heart. But I actually really feel that way because I don't think money's a problem for God. I don't think he's reliant upon it like we are. And so give what you decide in your heart to give, as much as you can sacrifice to give over and above for special missions. It's always appreciated by those who receive it, right? So I just want to say a word about that. Finally, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. I want to start by telling a story that I may have told before. We're 3.5 years in to me speaking here. So you're at the point now where you might get recycled material. And I'm hoping some of you forgot. Now, most of you haven't been here for 3.5 years. You're like, this all seems new, but then, like, Chad's over there. You know, I've heard this story before. So I'll talk to him about his critical heart that I made up after church that you don't have. So I was in 3rd grade. Kyle Eastman, 3rd grade.
Come on now.
I was a scrawny little thing, but I was joyful. I was a happy kid, and I was in Mrs. Planbeck's room. I remember her name, Mrs. Planbeck, my 3rd grade teacher. And I have a really bad memory, but this moment stuck with me, and it has. It was what we call a core memory, perhaps even a slightly 3rd grade version of trauma. So I'm sitting in class, and I get over the loudspeaker, Kyle Eastman, can you come to the office? Now I'm a pretty good kid, so I think they're probably just giving me an award. This is what I think. I will happily go and collect whatever it is you want to give me. And so I get up, I go, and I think nothing of it. I don't think anybody in the class did too. I think they were more shocked, like, is he in trouble? I was a goody two-shoes. I had the wrong problem. I had the other side of the problem. So I go to the class, and the vice principal, I remember this really strangely, weirdly, clearly. And she's like, Kyle, I want you to, she gave me a piece of paper, and she said, I want you to write down on this paper anything you've done that's been bad today.
Wow.
I was like, yeah, I immediately started panicking. I'm like, what did I do, right? And that day, little Jimmy behind me in class pushed little Timmy, who fell into me, and I hit little Susie, and she scraped her knee. This is a real event. This really happened. And I was really torn up by it because I thought I was in trouble. So I spent a whole paragraph describing, like, it wasn't my fault. Like, I'm pretty sure it was Jimmy and Timmy. I don't want to be a rat, though. I don't want to be a snitch, you know what I mean? But if you need to know, like, I'll be the snitch to get out of trouble, right? And so I go into this whole thing. She looks at it and she puts it aside and she's like, that's not what I want to talk about. And I'm like, I don't think I'm getting an award. It's pretty somber. And she's like, were you smoking in the boys' bathroom? Now, if you know me, you could be, but in 3rd grade, I definitely didn't know what smoking was. 100%. I could barely tell time in 3rd grade, bro. You know what I mean? I'm not smoking. And so I just burst into tears. Started crying. So she probably perceives that as guilt. But that's just, I don't know what to do right now. This is my defense mechanism. My older sister is a fierce woman. And she was fierce from the time she came out of the womb. She's in 5th grade at the time. And they called her to come in, I guess as like a witness against me. And she started like just reaming the VP. Just laid into her. Like, how could you do this? Like you don't even know my brother. Like, you're accusing him. And she's like, whoa, relax. Your mom's in the way. And we're going to clear this up. And I'm like, oh, yes, we will. 5 minutes later, I'm just tears streaked. I'm panicking. I'm like, my life's over. I'm going to jail. You know what I mean? Like, my mom walks in to the VP's office. She's like, Kyle, you can go. Close the door behind you.
Wow.
Yeah. So I walk out, and like 3.5 minutes later, the vice principal comes out. Somber. She comes up, she gets on her knee in front of me. She said, I'm so sorry for accusing you wrongly. And that was it. And I remember thinking, what did my mom say to this woman? Does she remember this story? Like, you know what I'm saying? I remember feeling so safe the moment my mom walked in the room. It was like so tragic. My sister came and that helped, but then mom came and it was just like, oh, she's going to end this woman. And I'm sure the woman was well-intentioned. Like, I totally made her the antagonist. Like, I'm sure she's lovely, you know. But my mom laid into her. And my mom would later tell me what she said, and she barely remembers what she said. But my mom's character, I left her a message today. I left her a little video message today, and I was telling her that, not everybody had a great mom growing up. There are people in here that didn't have a mom that you felt close to, or that you felt protected you. Perhaps your mom is not here anymore, or perhaps you don't know your mom. For those of you that's the case, I want to say I'm sorry for how this day impacts you. It's a different day for everybody. I appreciated what Emily said about that. There's a sensitivity there. And I grew up with a mom who's fiercely protective of me. And when I think about my mom, I think about that fierce protection that my mom always offered me. And there's so many stories I could tell. That's one of my favorites, obviously, because I remember to this day. And God, while he often refers to himself generally as a father, often gives himself the characteristics of a mother. There's a reason for that. In Matthew 23, I had you turn there. We're going to look at verse 37. Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing. There's so much to unpack from these verses that we won't. If jumping into a verse without context is confusing, because you're like, well, what's he doing here? Well, you should know that right before this is perhaps Jesus' most scathing rebuke of the Pharisees that he ever gives. The Pharisees were these corrupt Jewish leaders who really took advantage of their power to abuse and manipulate the people under them very selfishly. And Jesus was, he wanted justice, right? And so he really attacked them verbally with his righteous indignation. This is the end of that, and Jesus he's on his way to Jerusalem at the end of his life. And he looks at Jerusalem, and Jerusalem for him represents all of God's people. And he looks at, he's not talking about the city, right? He's talking about the people of God. And he's like, I just wish that you would let me shelter you. Like, I wish you'd come under my wings and let me protect you like a mother hen. And I've always had this really clear picture of, like, a mama bird wrapping her arms around her little eggs or her little kids, right? But I did some very basic research on the internet, which is super reliable. And I went to the first website that was provided me, so I'm sure this information is going to be spot on. It sounded right. I did a little bit on just like, what is a mother hen like with her chicks? Why would Jesus say this? I just want to share you some of the things I learned. The mother hen primarily provides heat in the cold for her babies, for her chicks, protection from predators, guides them in what to drink, how to explore, where to rest, roost, and perch. Basically, how to be an adult hen one day. Here's a quote from in a scientific article about mother hens. I don't know who's writing it, but they did a great job. It says, I read more of it than I needed to. That's how into it I was. And I'm not into hens. I'm not it's like my thing. It says, she provides this care until they are about 6 years old. Almost constant protection. She provides until they're 6 years old. I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
It's 6 years old? My son, I'm about ready to kick him out of the house. He's 7. You made a good job. They're 6 years old, and they're sufficiently feathered to maintain their own body temperature, strong enough to perch and escape danger, and smart enough to make their own choices. Mother hens know instinctively, this is interesting, how long to sit on their eggs, when to turn them, and they will even occasionally leave to take care of their own stuff. And that time of leaving provides the eggs the perfect amount of sunlight for their brain processing abilities. How do they know that, first of all? What is this article I'm reading? But it's pretty wild. Yeah. But they have to come back in time so they don't lose too much heat and die in embryo. While in the egg, the chick learns the sound of their mother's specific cluck. It's really special. And actually, they let the mom know when they're on their way. Like, I'm coming. Your life's about to get a lot busier. When there's danger, the mother hen teaches her chicks a very specific clucking sound, and the chicks are immediately, generally, obedient. No matter what they're doing, how much fun they're having, how important it is, and they run back under their mother's wings. And I didn't do a PowerPoint. I let myself off the hook this week. But there's this one picture of a mother hen wrapping her arms, and there's 10 chicks in there, and all their heads are sticking out, and they feel safe in there. They relax, their body, their heart rate goes down, the whole thing. And of course, if you read what Jesus says, you don't instinctively know that unless you raise hens. Yeah. But Jesus is communicating something here about God's character. Yeah. If you read between the lines, you see the truth that pervades Scripture, that God longs to bring us under his wings. He even uses that language at times, especially in Isaiah. Protecting us, sheltering us, taking the heat for us, giving us the heat we need, helping face the danger for us. Surely this is just indicative of what he did on the cross, right? Yeah. Taking our danger, providing for us in our pain. I will often say this. I believe what you think about God is the most important thing about you. Yeah. When I say, what do you think about God, what comes into your head is the most formative thing in your life, whether you know it or not. It shapes everything about you. The way you live, your lifestyle choices. Obviously, what you believe, even subconsciously, impacts the way you act, always. If you're ever wondering, what do you believe, look first to the fruit of your life and then work backwards. The fruit of your life is a roadmap to what you really believe. about God. It'll always change the way you live. You know, when we're in the pool with the kids, teaching them to swim, if mom's in the pool, if Kristen's there, I'm going to brag on Kristen a little bit, and she's probably relieved she's not here. She's like, don't brag about me. I'm like, you can't stop me, so I'm going to do it. And most of my mom's stories are about my wife or my mom. And when Kristen's in the pool and the kids want to jump in, they won't jump in unless mom or dad's there at this point, because they don't feel confident swimming. And when they jump, they need to come into our arms. But as they become older and a little more courageous, Rowan would be like, back up. You know, and I'm like, okay. And he's like, a little more. I'm like, okay. And he's like, don't go any further. You know what I mean? Like, that's my limit of my, not vertical, but horizontal. He's like, I'm not going any further, but if he knows I'm there. Now, the first time Rowan tried to jump in the pool, I had to coax him with every persuasion tactic I had. Because he was like, I don't trust that you're going to catch me. But after 100 times of me catching him, he doesn't even think about it, right? From time to time, when the kids jump in the pool, Kristen or myself will let them flounder a little bit. We're not going to let them drown, but we'll let them struggle. Why? That's how they learn to swim, right? And perhaps the best real-life metaphor of this is what happened with Peter and Jesus when Peter walks on the water. If you're familiar with the story, Jesus is walking on water, and Peter's like, tell me to come to you. He's like, I'm not coming unless you tell me. And Jesus says, come. Of course, Peter starts to walk. And interestingly enough, Peter starts to sink, and Jesus waits for him to call out. He lets him struggle a little bit. And I'm always thinking, like, did he just, like, drop? Was it like was it quicksand? Like, what was this like? Jesus, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know how much you can say, but whatever it was, Jesus waited. We do this with our kids when we're teaching them to swim. God does this with us all the time. I think it's really important that in the time of Jesus, the people didn't trust that he could protect them from the Pharisees and from the Jewish authority. And so they didn't follow him because they feared what his teaching would bring on their lives. Right? Yeah. And I think this is certainly still true today, right? So much of whether you want to follow Jesus, it's about really whether you trust Jesus. It's not even about whether you're choosing to follow, it's whether you choose to trust. Because complete trust, following will always follow that. When you trust deeply enough, you will go where that person is going. You will jump. You will move. You'll do the thing you're asked to do. What do you believe about God? And are you able to correctly interpret who God is when life is difficult? You know, when my son first starts to flounder in the water, he immediately panics. How could you let me sink? You know, and I'll catch him. And I'm like, what in our history thus far has made you believe I was going to let you sink? He's like, nothing. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, trust me next time. This is such a good analogy for the way we react with God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like life is good, and we're like, I trust God, it's solid. And then like something goes wrong. Like some crazy bill, which happens to every human being who pays bills. You're like, didn't remember I was subscribed to that. You know what I mean? Like, didn't you know that was coming? Oh, your mortgage can change? Like, that's shocking. You know what I mean? Like, well, how did taxes? Like, so much. Like, teaching Rowan about taxes is hilarious. You know, I'll like he'll buy something, and it's, $7.99. And he's like, here's $8. And I'm like, oh no, son. You gotta give him 9 bills. He's like, what? This is corrupt. You know what I mean? Like, oh, and I was like, don't talk to me about it. I don't know the deal. Taxes are mostly good. So, I think sometimes in the moment, we're so fast to panic. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that how long it takes you to panic when life goes wrong is a good indicator of how much you trust God. Yeah. You can't put a number on that time, really, right? It's not like I can say, like, how much does Tyler trust God, right? How much does Zach trust God? There's not a number. I can't say 100 times. But length of time between hardship and questioning God is a decent indicator. Mm-hmm. How much do you trust God? How quickly do you panic? How quickly do you say, why, God, are you doing this? You know, I remember when we went in for Noelle's birth. And up to that point of pregnancy, Christmas pregnancy, had been pretty good with Noelle. This is our youngest. She's about 18, 19 months old now. And she went in that morning for a little procedure just to make sure everything was right. And the baby was facing the right direction. All was well. And she's like, she might come tonight. And we were like, great. We want that to happen. We want it to happen naturally. It was really important to Kristen. We went back that night, and the baby had flipped completely over. This is not an abnormal thing, but it is a scary thing. It's one of those things that, like 100 years ago, a lot of people would die from this. But now, because of modern medicine, there's less natural fear, but it's still kind of a wild thing. And I remember Kristen's response was so calm. Because the doctors were like, whoa! Like, you know what? When you're at the doctor and they look at something, and they don't say anything to you, but you can tell.
Yes.
They're like, ooh. And I'm like, could you not do that with your face? Like, can you do that with your face? At the moment, you also tell me. It's like when someone texts you, like, hey, can we talk? And you're like, not until you tell me why we're talking. You know what I mean? In a week, I'm like, you better let me know in the next 30 minutes why, and then maybe I can wait a week. The doctor did that. You know, so the baby had turned. And so we have two options. One, we can do an emergency C-section, which again, like 35% of women in America give birth through C-section. But nobody, generally speaking, if you want to give birth naturally, it's important, right, to you. And nobody wants an emergency C-section, right? And so they're like, or we can try to turn the baby. And for those of you that have ever been around, for all the moms that are obviously you've been around, but for OBGYNs and anybody in that space, turning the baby in the womb, they have to like press on your belly and try to twist the baby around. And it is excruciatingly painful. Like Kristen later would tell me that it was as painful as giving birth to our first two. Which she did, Kate, without an epidural or anything, which I'm not down on epidurals, I'm just saying, like that's how much pain she was in. And I remember they were like, this is gonna be excruciatingly painful, and you don't have to do it. And she's like, well, what's best for her that we try? And then she's immediately like, let's do it. That's a mom, right? Like, great moms are like that. I will sacrifice anything for my child. And I think what the story of Kristen tells me is that what was indicated to me in that moment was her deep trust for God, because she didn't panic.
Yeah.
She just felt like, okay, like I know God's in control. And at least I know he can be in control if he wants to be. And he knows what's going on. He's not surprised. He's not like, oh, I didn't realize Noelle turned in the womb. He knew it was going to happen. He allowed it to happen. And I could just see that settle over Kristen. And it was an indicator to me of like, here's a woman who trusts God deeply. Of course, I learned a lot about sacrifice. So that first point is that God longs to protect you. And then my second and final short point is that just like the mother hen protects, she also is tender with her children. And this is the way God is with us. Yeah. Fiercely protective, like my mom on the day I got accused of smoking, and tender. And I'm just going to read this to you. Paul, following the example of Jesus, is talking to the church in Thessalonica. And he says, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Mm-hmm. That line always was meaningful to me. But when I observed Kristen nurse our three children, it became much more meaningful to me. Because for any mom who's ever nursed their child, you know there's no escape. It's like you are providing life for this child, always. And at first it's like every 2 hours. And it's not like the baby's like, I'll sleep at night for you and then I'll wake up whenever you're ready. Like, I did some calculations for you because I love to do that kind of thing, which I'm going to share with you in a second. But I think it's important also to remember and realize, and I think we know this instinctively, but tenderness, the action of a parent being consistently tender is absolutely vital to a child's development. Yeah. To develop in a way that allows them to be able to deal with conflict, forgive people when they're older, critically think. A child needs to know they're safe, hence our first point, but more important is that a child knows that they're loved. And you've heard me say this before, but there's nothing more important in a child's life than to know that they're loved and to feel that love. A child can be loved but not feel the love. It's an important distinction. Research backs this up like in multiple occasions, exponentially. Like it's such an important thing for kids to feel love. And of course, Paul says we cared for you as children. He's talking to his ministry because that's the way God cared for him and for us. And, you know, we recently read through Hosea about 4 months ago, and there's one part where God says, it was I who taught Israel how to walk, taking them by the hand. Like God styles himself as a nursing mom, as a parent helping his child learn to walk. And like I said, God primarily relates to us as a father, but in so many ways, he's more like a mother. And in that character, and why is that? Because generally speaking, moms are often the one that tenderness comes more instinctively, right? Naturally caring. Not always the case, but it's often the case. I think God wants us to embrace him that way. Like to think of God as a tender, safe place. Sometimes we struggle with this. I want my kids, when they do something wrong, to know it was wrong and to feel perhaps an appropriate amount of fear, but I don't want them to be terrified of me.
Yeah.
Right? And there are times when Rowan or Kate has acted terrified, and I'm like, do I sleepwalk and do something terrible to you at night? Like, because I feel like my interactions with you are safe, and I have to talk through that with them. Like, why are you so afraid right now? Like, what am I? And there have been times when they've said things and it's really convicted me. Like, oh, I did raise my voice at that time. I shouldn't have done that. Or my kids convict me a lot. I apologize to my kids as much as I apologize to anybody. I think it's important for us parents to do, because we make a lot of mistakes. You know, I think that one of the things I notice in children is that they're drawn towards tenderness. And people who are great with kids are universally tender, right? Or they know how to put that on when any kid walks by. And it's interesting because Noelle has a clear favorite in our house. And spoiler alert, it's not me. And I don't think it's because I'm not tender, but it's because her mom is so great and has been so sacrificial for her. I think Noelle feels that connection with her. And it's to the point where, and this will happen probably later today, I'll go down and get her, and I'll be holding her, and she'll be perfectly happy. She can be with somebody else, and she'll sees me and she wants me. But then, and she's like, even laughing. And then Mom will walk, Kristen will walk by. And she'll start crying loud. And I know it's loud because half the church is like, you know what I mean? Like, did somebody drop her? You know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm tenderly holding her and she doesn't want me. Like, it's because she knows, like, it could be better. You know what I mean? Like, I could be with Mom. She's drawn to that. Now, if Kristen wasn't tenderly caring for her, do you think she'd be as drawn to her? Only for a while, until she realized kids instinctively learn who they can trust and not trust. Kids are actually really good about that. Like, I think they have a good instinct, some perhaps more than others. Even at Noelle's tender age, she just kind of has instincts. And she knows what her mom provides her. Perhaps because of how sacrificial it is required to be a great mom. And I want to give you some math. And some of this is to validate all the moms and all the work you've done that no one sees. So, and I use Noelle as an example. I'm going to kind of give this in closing. I'll give you just a final thought, and we'll end service. I calculated that Noelle, my youngest, has been alive for about 580 days and nights. Okay? And I did some math on how often she woke up when we were sleeping. Keyword. Not when she was sleeping. When we were sleeping. How many times did we wake up for her? Now, Noelle woke up more than our other two. She averaged more. She was colic for the first 5.5 months. She really has struggled with her sleep. It's connected to some of the genetic disorder that she has. We think her sleep's really bad. In the first year, I roughly calculated 1,400 wake-ups. Wow. Okay? It's a lot. Now, if you're a mom, you're like, I think it was more. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still sleep deprived, like 10 years later. Year 2, I was probably about half that so far, and maybe even a little. Like, the trajectory is less. Amen to that. Right now, she's only waking up once a night, and it's like, praise be to God in the highest. Like, I can't even tell you, like, how grateful I am. So I calculated that since she's been born, she's woken us up from sleep just over 2,000 times. When you factor in the times that I was with her, which is, I don't know, perhaps 1 in 4, I estimate that in the last year, Kristen has woken up from her sleep to care for Noelle for an average of 30 minutes to an hour over 1,000 times. Wow. That's like a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't even do the hours, but it's a lot of hours. And by the way, we have 2 other kids.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the horror story of the other night. I was dead asleep, which is hard for me. So it's precious to me. It's 4 a.m., which is my best sleep. Like 4 to 7. It's like my body's like, I got it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm on it. I woke up to breathing on my face. Like hot air, like. And I'm turned to the outside, and I open my eyes, and Rowan is no more than 5 inches from me. And his eyes are like this. And he's sleepwalking. He does this thing where he sleepwalks, and he says crazy stuff. The other night, Kate sleptwalked and tore all the books off her bookshelf. I was like, do you remember what happened last night? She's like, no. And I'm like, oh. I woke up like a crap. Like, I woke up and Rowan, it took years off my head. You don't just go back to sleep. It's like watching a horror movie. Like, I don't even watch horror movies, but I've seen the 5 seconds of preview before I look away. And I know that's what happens. You know, kids wake you up like that. And that's not even including all those times. All those waking ups. All that sleep deprivation. I don't think I've ever heard Kristen complain one time. That's not human. No. Now, has she complained? She would tell you she has. But it's never happened out loud, and it's never happened for more than a couple seconds if it has. What's my point? My point is that I think our kids love their mom so much because they feel her tenderness even when it requires so much sacrifice for her. Tenderness is easy when you're super happy and you like the kid or you like the person. Tenderness is really hard when you just got woken up for the third time in 5 hours and you're angry and you're exhausted. You don't know how you can keep going. That's tenderness. And I think that's why Paul refers to the nursing mother, why God says, I taught you how to walk, why he has that motherly quality. Moms don't spend time calculating this stuff, right? Perhaps if you're a mom here, you didn't even realize how much credit you were owed. Or perhaps you remind your husband as much as you can. But the point is that you have done more than you realize you could have ever done, right? I tell my mom this all the time. I'm like, Mama, I think it took me until I had kids to realize what you did for me. And I really honestly could never know because I'm not a mom. And this idea of how many times the moms in here, you guys have put your kids before you, put your needs last. How many cold meals you've eaten? Oh my goodness gracious. So many cold. You just learn to eat. You're just like not even want to. I'm too tired to microwave it. You know what I mean? My hands can't press those buttons. Cold meals. How many broken nights of sleep embraced? How many bodily fluids cleaned up? Don't even get me started. I'm now the designated cleaner upper of that stuff, but I wasn't always. How many tears dried? How much does a mom endure? Now, why is that instinct there? Because it's God's instinct. Right? God's the one who, when the kid throws up, he goes and cleans it. He wipes the tear, right? He takes them out of the car seat when they're covered in whatever. He does that stuff. He doesn't have somebody else do it. It's what a mom would do. It's what a great mom would do. This lesson doesn't really have this practical challenge for you to walk away with. I suppose it's just a reminder that you are tenderly loved and watched over. Yeah. I think that truth, it should be transformational in your life. To know you're fiercely loved and cared for, if you can believe it, really transforms the way you want to live. Right? So let's say a prayer. I'm going to throw a couple more announcements at you because I know that Luke is eagerly anticipating those announcements. Yep. And then we'll close out. I just picked on you because you're a great guy.